Good morning, everybody. One of the things that Mike didn't say in my introduction is I am devoted to open space events, conferences, and so on. And as a devotee, one of my firm beliefs is whoever shows up are the right people. So I'm assuming that anybody who isn't here is off usefully taking care of themselves somewhere. And I suspect there's a fair amount of self-care needed this morning. Just from the tweet stream, I don't know. Although I did see Geeta's here, so that, you know. there you are. You made it. That's great. So, the talk I'm giving this morning is primarily about this book. I didn't have my glasses on when you showed me the bio, and I have to say that the name of the book in the bio is actually the first edition, and we now have a second edition here. It has a slightly different name. But if you want to tweet, that's me. You've already heard my introduction. These are some things I've worked on. I've had, I think, a kind of an interesting role in the Agile community in that from the beginning, when I was introduced to Agile, which was in 1997, I guess, I came into Agile through the extreme programming door. I met some of those folks who were working in that way in the late 90s, and I was doing some other kind of work that had to do with team development in technical environments and so on. And we said, maybe we have something to learn from each other. And so as I have been a part of the Agile community over the years, my role has been looking for the places where it seemed like there was an idea that something should happen, but no real sort of instructions or practices or things to make it happen. And so that certainly was the inspiration for the Agile Retrospectives book. There was a principle at the end of the manifesto that said, at regular intervals, the team pauses to reflect, tune, and adjust so that they can improve. And but there were no practices. Nobody knew exactly how to do that. And so Esther and I decided to write the retrospectives book. And since then, every model I've added has been sort of the same thing. It's like, well, what are we told to do? And there's something missing that I know from my background is necessary. And then as I reflect back on the things that I have contributed, when you get older, you do that. You start reflecting on your career, and I noticed that there was actually, one thing was a surprise. I never really thought of myself as a person who built models. And I look back and there are all these models behind, in my wake coming along. And then I realized that all these models have something to do with learning. That knowledge, the kind of knowledge work that software development is all about learning. In many dimensions, on many levels, we write unit tests to learn about and refactor to learn about the behavior of the code, right? We learn about our customers and their needs. We learn about how to behave as a team. We learn new languages and new technologies as they come. It's just learning every which way, right? We create experiments to improve, and we learn from those. So that really has been kind of the focus of all of my work. And the Liftoff work is no different. How many of you have done some kind of event when you are first starting to work on a product or first engaging a project or coming together in a new team? How many of you have spent some time getting started. All right, great. That's wonderful. And so we're going to talk more about that. When Ainsley and I were working on the book, we looked around at before we had you don't have a name until later when you're writing a book. You start pulling together stuff, and then you figure out what the name is. Sort of like having a baby, you wait till they're born, and then you figure out what its name is. So we didn't know what the name would be, but what we knew was we weren't really satisfied with the metaphor of kickoff or boot camp, or, that there was something about that didn't really capture for us the real potential that was inherent in these events. So we wanted to make, to help teams get started in the kind of way that set them on the path to where they needed to go. And where they needed to go is a successful, high-value delivery, right? It's no fun to be on a project that is not successful. It's no fun to be on a project that really isn't valuable to anybody. It's no fun to be on a project that never delivers. It's just building frustration, right? And too many of our projects have been those other ways, right? So what we're looking for is heading toward successful, high-value delivery. And I have a particular definition in mind when I say that. When I say a successful, high-value delivery, I want all of these things on this slide to be true. I want the customer to get what they want. I want them to say, yes, this is what I want. I'm going to put this to use. I want it to create value for our business as well as for the customer. If we can't stay in business, what's the point, right? So we need to be getting value. There needs to be a time frame that fits the customer's needs. It's no good if you give them what they wanted, but it's too late or too not frequent enough or whatever that might be. It has to be easily maintainable and supportable afterwards. Right? We don't want to spend all our time on bug fixes. We want to keep building new features and exploring what might happen with those features, right? And then finally, and maybe, I hesitate to give priority to anything on this list, but if I were going to give priority to something, it would be the last item. We got to leave team members with more capability than they had before. This successful high-value delivery should be a growthful experience for everyone. We should end it better than we started it. And we need to be eager to work on the next thing. So a death march does not qualify. There's a problem with a death march. At the end, where are we? Dead. Yes, no energy. When I was just thinking about that, I was talking to somebody the other day about where retrospectives came from. And I was reflecting on Norm Kurth's book. If none of you have read Norm Kurth's book, it's really wonderful. It's called Project Retrospectives, a handbook for team reviews. Norm wrote his book kind of pre-Agile, when the projects were all very long, very big, very much failing. And Vashko had a bunch of slides yesterday about, the state of things at that time. And he used to routinely, so the project retrospectives that he's talking about would happen at the end of those projects, after everything had been delivered or not, but the project was done, and presumably everybody was going to move on to something new. And the advice in the book is, wait a few weeks before you hold the retrospective because people need time to recover from the effort. And I hadn't thought about that for a long time, except in context of this, it's like, recover from the effort. I mean, that's death march projects, right? We don't want those. Success means we not only are ready for the next thing, we're eager. We've learned a bunch of stuff and we want to apply it right now. Wow, how much better we can make this next thing. Right? That's what we want. That's a successful project. So, or a successful deliverable. So, given that, are we ready to lift off? Are we ready to have a liftoff? So, to know if we're ready or not, we ask a few questions. Do we know what the product is going to be? And does it have sponsorship? Right? Is there somebody who's prepared to advocate for this product? Does it have a business case? Can we see how it fits in the general direction of the organization and is going to improve things in that way? Is there funding? Is somebody giving the money to make this happen? And do we have a clear intention for the team? What is it we want them to accomplish? Right? If we can answer all those questions, yes, then we're probably ready to start thinking about our liftoff. But wait. Is this only for new teams and new products? No. Actually, in our book, then the way the book is written, every chapter ends with a story, a real life story, contributed by a number of our colleagues, a couple of whom are here today. And a number of those stories are not about a start, they're about a restart. A team that had gotten going, had not gotten the attention they needed in the beginning, and was kind of thrashing around, needed to refocus. Liftoffs are good then, too. So whether you're bringing a new team of people together to work on something, or whether you've got a new product and you're bringing an existing team to a new product, or whether you've got a situation where you've got a team that really needs to kind of rethink where they're headed together, a liftoff is appropriate for all of those conditions. So now let's get started. Well, wait a minute. Maybe we're not getting started yet. First, I want to talk to you about teams. And specifically, teams as complex adaptive systems. Right? Now, it may seem odd because I'm one of those people who goes around saying, never say resources, it's always people, right? We're not resources, right? And here I am calling a team a system, right? How many of you have studied complexity and complex systems and those? I bet there are a number of folks in this room. Okay. All right, so you can check me on this. Teams are systems. Teams are complex, adaptive, human systems. And whether we're talking about a human system or an ecological system or a software system, complex adaptive systems exhibit the same characteristics wherever they are, wherever we find them. So we can tell what the system is. We have some sense of what's in and what's out. What is this system? So when we've got a team, we know this is the team, and ideally this is not the team. When that gets fuzzy, that we get into trouble, right? So we know what we're looking at. It has an identity. It has some people call it a container. I always like to make this gesture when I'm talking about it, right? This is the system. It's here, right? It has a container. We know what it is. So that's the whole system that we're talking about. It always exists in a greater system. It always has another environment in which it is only a part. And it has parts. In the sense of a team, those parts may be team members and other things that make that system go, that team system go. In the case of software, it may be code, it may be architecture, design. There's many parts to that, right? And there are always interactions between and among those parts. Exchanges of some kind or another, transactions, right? There's flow of information, there's conversation, there's building relationships in this instance. All of those kinds of things. That's true in every complex adaptive system, and it's definitely true in complex adaptive human systems. Human systems have the additional characteristic of there's emotion at play, right? Wetlands, you're not experiencing necessarily that much emotion going on. It's a complex adaptive system, but no. So a team is a complex adaptive system. That means it has certain characteristics, and that means that we need to consider this fact when we are preparing for our liftoff, right? So now this is not good. Okay. Give up. So why does that matter? Do you have a guess? Anybody have a guess? Why does this matter? Why should we spend time thinking about a team as a complex adaptive system? It's all about people. Yeah. You have to be thinking about that if you're trying to create some kind of process, because you have to fit, right? There has to be a fit. Yes? It gives you clues for how you can set up additional conditions for success. Exactly. It matters because, it is going to work. Because if we want this team to be effective, we want it to be a cohesive group. We want it to behave as one, right? That really is the most effective and efficient way for a team to work. And group cohesion, I looked this up on Wikipedia, so it has to be true. Group cohesion comes into play when bonds link. So there are interactions and exchanges, right? Members of a social group, so the parts of the system, to one another and to the whole group, right? Does this sound anything like our complex adaptive systems language, right? So if we want group cohesion, we have to be thinking about these things. So, and there's more to that, in that members of strongly cohesive groups tend to want to be engaged, tend to want to stick it out to as long as that group is together. I have another question for you. How many of you have ever participated in keep your hands up, because I'll have a follow-up question. How many of you have ever participated in a high-performing, synergistic, highly cohesive team? Okay. Keep your hands up if you're on a team like that right now. A few of you. All right. Yeah. Okay. So you know what that feels like. Those of you who put your hands down, how many of you have spent the time ever since looking for another situation like that one? Once you've had that experience of working as a very cohesive team, you will do anything to get back to it because it's the best way. It's the best way to work. So, with all of those things in mind, let's design a liftoff for our team. So have a team in your mind. Think of a team that you're presently working with, or maybe the next thing that's coming up for you. Maybe it's a team that's currently not doing so well that you think could use a little booster, right? Let's design a liftoff for them. So we want to really promote team cohesion. That's part of we've got this complex system. We want to promote cohesion in the system. And we're going to have to pay attention to a number of things. We're going to have to pay attention to the task, obviously. That's what's paying our salaries and everything. And we have to pay attention to the social relations. We have to pay attention to helping these parts feel like they are in a whole, that they are part of this system. And because it's humans, we have to take care of the emotional content as well. Somebody did a session yesterday on emotions. When we're talking about people interacting together, it's dangerous to leave out that understanding. So this all has to be part of our liftoff design. We need to think about this complex adaptive system. What kinds of containers are we going to create? We've got this whole system, and then we're going to need to sort of reinforce that. So how are we going to reinforce the idea that this is a whole? What differences among the parts do we think are going to show up that might create some patterns that, we want to make sure that at the start we're creating the kind of patterns that we would like to see continue, right? And finally, what does that mean about the kinds of conversations and interactions that people should have during their liftoff? So we want to keep that in mind. We also want to keep in mind that this is going to be an intense learning experience. A liftoff is a very intense learning experience. So we want to make sure we've got the right conditions for that to happen. And we can do that by how we put together our design. So we want to keep it alive, which means pay attention to the fact that this is humans coming together. We want them to be as alive as possible. We learn best when we feel most alive, right? When our emotions are engaged, whether that's excitement or anticipation or curiosity, right? We want those emotions to be engaged. People have senses, so we want to appeal to their senses. We want color, we want music, we want sound, good sounds, we want tastes. I mean, think about this event and all the ways in which it is appealing to your humanness. Humans like to be in relationship in general. So how are we going to build those team relationships, right? Keep it alive. Make sure that we are doing that. Then the next thing that we want to do is do it for real. Humans learn best when they're focused on really doing a thing to learn a thing. Right? That's Woody Zuhl talks about that. Do the thing to learn the thing. This is what builds fluency in teams. The whole fluency topic is another topic for another day, but this is how you build fluency and mastery at being a team, at doing the work that's in front of us, is we get engaged with the real work as quickly as possible. So we don't want much in this liftoff that's going to take us on tangents or sidesteps, right? Everything needs to be very much focused on this team, those social relationships, those task relations, the building the perceived unity, and connecting with the emotional content. Start obvious, stay obvious. We want to keep everything as clear as possible. We want to eliminate any distractions or anything that might cause people to hesitate or not get engaged or feel confused. We want things clear and obvious. We want to focus on the flow in our design. We want to make sure that as we are introducing things to the team and whoever else is in this liftoff, that things are being introduced in such a way that they are easily consumable. They are sized and sequenced in such a way that the learning can happen in a flow. That we are not interrupting the flow of learning that is happening. We're not trying to shove too much in, making people feel kind of panicked and overwhelmed, and we're not going to give them too little so that they are bored and start looking off in other directions. Right? So we want them to be fully engaged. So that means we have to focus on the flow. And then, this is funny, to have this thing that says setting first at the bottom of the list. And so we put it at the top of the list, but then it doesn't make sense because what we're saying is one of the first things we have to consider is where is this going to take place? What is the climate? What is the physical setting? And how can that setting support the other 4 points on this list? How can the setting best help us do it for real? How can the setting help us help people come alive? So on. So those are all important. There's more about that in the reference there. So we choose a selection of activities. We choose a selection of activities, processes, if you will, that will help the team move through the time that we have to do this liftoff. I generally recommend at least a day. It's a wise investment to take out at least a day to do this, sometimes more, depending. So if we've done all the analysis of our team, we know what kind of containers we want to create, what kind of exchanges, we've thought about our cohesion and how we're going to think about social relations and task relations, all those things. So we might ask the sponsor or another executive to come at the beginning of our liftoff and give us a little introduction, help the team understand why this is an important thing for them to work on. We might do some of those iteration or sprint zero activities. Maybe there's some setup that we need to do. If so, we would consider that to be part of the liftoff. Do all of those things at once. There might be training. Maybe there's some new technical skill that we're going to need to take on this project. In some organizations, we've had as part of a liftoff training for people who are not the actual team members, but people who are going to be working with the team to help them understand how to behave in an Agile, when they're interacting with an Agile team and an Agile environment. Sometimes it's new programming language that's needed for this new thing. Could be a number of things. TDD training. We might do a futurespective or a retrospective on our past projects, a future perspective on what we think things will look like when we have delivery. People here have been doing impact mapping, story mapping. We might include that because that might help us prepare an initial backlog. That could be a part of the liftoff. I'm not saying all of these things need to be in your liftoff. I'm saying depending on what you have discovered about the kind of liftoff you need to create, you may choose a variety of activities to include. You might have an open space meeting. Right? No matter what else you do, You will want to include, this is the only must-have, you will want to include some team chartering. Now, in some organizations, the word chartering has a connotation. And in that case, use some other word. This is my advice to you. Use some other word. Some people are choosing to just call everything lifting off, and they don't worry about But you want to do this activity under whatever name you have, right? We use team chartering because that comes out of our background, but then we started running into people from project managers who have a strong PMI background, and they got it all confused with the team initiation chartering, and and lawyers have another whole thing for chartering. So I don't care what you call it, frankly. I really don't. Just do this thing. And there are others. These are not the only things you can do. This is not the exhaustive, comprehensive list. This is a short list of what you might do. So let's look deeper into that chartering model that we're talking about. Here's the model. It has 3 elements: purpose, alignment, and context. We include purpose because that's where the inspiration comes from. That is an emotional connection to the work that you make with the team. We include alignment because we need that sense of collaboration, that tone of collaboration to start right from the beginning. And we include context because we need the team to understand that this is going to be a dynamic environment, that they are going to have to deal with some shifts, but we can give them some heads up about that. We can make that less painful, right? So these are the 3: purpose, alignment, and context. Let's dive into what we're going to do. So it happens in 2 sessions. There's a pre-work session where we get together with product manager, whoever these sponsors, whoever's going to facilitate the liftoff. Sometimes you might have key customers, not always. There's a way of thinking that through. But definitely you want those folks who have that vision for the new product engaged. And what they do is they work on sort of their beginning ideas of what the vision for this product is. I mean, we say product owners are supposed to carry the vision of the product, right? Let's make sure they're clear about that before we go lifting off any teams, right? So we want to have them able to articulate that, and then also what they believe is going to be the work of the team, right? Now the vision stays theirs. That they own that. They may, in the second session, when you bring the team in and other folks in, to look at purpose again, other things may happen. We'll talk about that in a minute. And in the second one, we work through the entire model, all 3 elements of the model. So purpose. We want to inspire. This is where we let people know why this is worthy work. What about this project makes it something worth putting your effort into? Showing up every Monday, working with your team members to make this happen, to manifest this product in the world. And how will we know if we've been successful? Right? If we have that stuff, people tend to find the motivation to bring to work. We do that through there are 3 elements. Each element has 3 parts. It's kind of a fractal thing if you start really looking at it. It goes deeper. I'm stopping here, but it goes deeper. In the product vision, we are looking for how will somebody's world change as a result of this product. What is our vision for what we will be the effect we will create in the world? And again, the product owner owns that. right? The team may ask questions to clarify what that pre-work has brought to them. Product owner may choose to make some changes based on that, but it's up to the product owner to make those changes, to accept those changes. The product owner owns that vision. The team mission, again, there's been some pre-work on that, but this is much more owned by the team. What is the nature of the work that will need to be done to accomplish, to make this vision manifest, to realize this vision? What do we have to do that? What is the work? What does the work look like? What are the outputs that we're going to have to create? What are the non-functional requirements that we're going to have to satisfy? All of those kinds of things. This, the team has a lot of input into because it's their work. Lean talks about making decisions about the work as close to the work as possible, right? When we're talking about what's the work of the team, we want the team heavily engaged in that. And then finally, we have something called mission tests, which it's kind of a joke, really, that it's there. We're looking at some other things, and some people call these objectives. Some people might say, these are progress indicators. We call them mission tests because it's Agile. Everything's test-driven in Agile. Why shouldn't the mission be test-driven, right? So we write a few tests. First, when we are lifting off, we write some tests that will tell us if at a certain date they go green, we have passed that test, or they go red, we have not passed that test, we know what we can learn from that. We have some ideas about what we can learn. So that's purpose. This purpose generally is a foundational piece. So when you have been doing your helping teams get started, how many of you have focused on something like a mission or purpose or that sort of thing? Okay, so some of you have. We've got some good experience in the room with that. All right, so the next part is alignment. Again, this is about building collaboration, that sense of perceived unity, right? This is where we're going to create one team. This is where if it's a team that's brand new to each other, this is where the trust building begins. If it's a team that's worked together for a while, this is where we begin to extend the trust. And we begin to have the experience of working collaboratively, and we make a commitment. It's interesting, in purpose, the team is committing to the work. In alignment, the team is committing to doing the work with each other. They really need two kinds of commitment when you're starting out. Commitment to the work and commitment to doing the work with these people. So in this one, again, we have 3: simple rules, core team, working agreement. Simple rules are an artifact, maybe not the right word, but an element of complex adaptive systems. They are the thing that enable flocks of birds and herds of animals and swarms and schools of fish to do the things they do without all crashing into each other and dying, right? Simple rules guide a system. They are system level, they guide a system, and they build cohesion. So there's a lot more about those, but they're very high level. You might think about them as principles that go along with values, but they're actually even simpler than that. Core team is where the team of people come together. They talk about what skills they have, why they believe they've been chosen to work as a part of this team, or why they've self-selected to work as a part of this team, and what they think they bring and what they're looking for from other people, and do they have all the skills they need in order to accomplish this mission they just committed to? Is there anybody else they're going to need to recruit? So there's a whole set of conversations there about who's on the team, why, how are we going to work together, and so on. And then finally, working agreements are more daily mundane agreements about, okay, so to get started, what's our definition of done? We'll work best together when, what are our core hours? How many meetings are we gonna have? What decisions are we gonna make, and what kinds of decision-making rules are we gonna use in those meetings? These are the real nitty-gritty agreements about how we're gonna work. So all of these three things, having the high-level kind of cohesive rules about how we're gonna work together, what's gonna guide our work, who we are, and then those really beginning ideas about what that work's going to look like when we're doing it, create alignment. The last part is the context. So back there. How many, when you've started off teams, do some kind of team building? Yeah. This is the most common thing that people do. So it's, in some ways, it's the most familiar. It's the easiest to bring this to bear. I don't mean to make any of this challenging. I'd like to make it as easy for you as possible to do this every time. So the last piece is context. This is the piece that is generally most ignored, and I think can be extraordinarily valuable when a team starts out. So here what we're doing is helping the team see not only their system as a team, but that greater whole, that larger system that they exist within. What does that look like? And where do they fit? What's their place in that larger system? And what risks might they be looking at? Risk analysis has always been done outside the team and sometimes completely opaque to teams. And yet it's a really useful thing to know what you might anticipate is coming your direction. So we accomplish these three things with a boundaries and interactions map. We map out the system. We sticky notes or whatever we have to hand. We map out the system. Team is in the middle, what's all around it, how do those interactions happen, what other boundaries do we need to be aware of? Are there limits to our decision-making authority? Are there boundaries, scope boundaries? What else is there that we need to know about when we begin the work? Then we talk about the committed resources, and here's the dreaded R word, and be assured when I say resources, I do not mean people. But there are lots of other parts of us that need to be present in a system in order for it to work. Team needs workspace. Team needs maybe training. They might need new equipment for something. They might need access to new tools, licenses. There are many kinds of things. They might need permission to make certain kinds of decisions or authority to order. They may need a budget. So what are all those kinds of resources that the team needs to get started? So we list those, we figure out what they have, what they don't have, how they're going to get it. And then finally, the perspective analysis. There are a number of ways of doing this, but the idea is to look out ahead. Sometimes impact mapping can help with this. There are other tools. A tool that Ainsley and I created is called an improv graph, where we look at things that different members of the team know might be happening in the next 3 to 4 months. Winter is coming. Somebody's likely to get sick. And we map that. How likely is that to happen? Kind of a likelihood, a probability dimension, and then a dimension of, and what would the impact of that be? Would it be a beneficial impact? Would it be a detrimental impact? Would it hurt us? And how? So we look at all that, and then we talk about, so what, do we want to encourage some of these things to happen if they're real opportunities and could really help us, or do we want to mitigate some of them if we think they would be a problem? So the team has that conversation. So how many of you have ever done this with your teams starting out? A few. Good. Great. Okay. So in conclusion, this is a living charter. This charter is intended to continue forward. So all we are creating in this first event, in this liftoff, is the very first draft. So it only has to be good enough to get started. We don't spend any time on, over wordsmithing or perfecting anything, because we are going to iterate on it. This is the last time we have to do the whole thing all at once. But from here on out, we can look at different parts. We can look at our mission tests. Have they come due? Is it time to swap them out? We can look at our working agreements. Have some of those become routine? Is it time to have some new working agreements? We look at different parts of it. Have we learned anything that would cause us to adjust our mission? But we only need to look at one of those pieces at a time from here on. When everyone is together, when everyone can make the same, can make the changes together, and so it's still a common understanding. Often, the other thing that we have heard lots of reports for this being useful for is onboarding. If you bring a new team member on, taking them through whatever state the existing chartering is in helps them to understand very quickly what the team's work is, how they plan to work together, and even have some influence on it. Right? So we need to think of it as a living document. Keep in mind it's collaborative. We call it chartering and not a charter, just because it's emerging over time. It's the conversations more than the document. And as we go along working together, we learn and we gain greater understanding, both about the nature of the work and about how we want to work together. So, I encourage you, whatever team you had in mind at the beginning of this talk, whatever complex adaptive system you are working with, consider helping them build that initial energy and momentum to overcome the inertia of doing nothing, right? Get them started. Give them that boost by helping them through a liftoff. So thank you.